Imagine waking up 100 years after your death as a computer. No body, no coffee, just you and infinite versions of you. Exploring the galaxy, arguing with yourself, and maybe saving humanity. Welcome to We Are Legion, We Are Bob, the 2016 Dennis E. Taylor runaway hit. I'm Kandas Rodarte.
And I'm Space Cadet Shane, second grade class.
And this is episode 1 of Sci-Fi Book Pod.
I feel like I'm that old Next Generation. There was that old dude that never got out of the below the deck scenario because he just not had the initiative.
Go ahead. Is that really how you feel?
Yes.
All right. So, Space Cadet Shane, explain to the listener what's going on here.
Well, we're going to go. We are discussing the book that we just got done listening to, which is Bobiverse, Book 1. Correct?
Bobiverse, Book 1, yes.
Yeah. We're gonna
the first of 5.
First of
there
5.
There are 5 books in the Bobiverse
books.
series.
Yes. I've actually listened to this book at least 2 or 3 times now. So for me, it kind of merges into the second one. So if I make references to the second one, that's because I just can't separate the two.
Well, the plan is that we will cover all 5 of the books in the first 3 to 5 episodes of Sci-Fi Book Pod.
Okay.
I do not know if Book 5 is available on audio yet.
Yes,
if
it is.
If it's not, it is? All right,
yeah,
then.
I listened to the Book 5 already.
Okay, well, I haven't, so there you have it. You're one up ahead of me.
Not really, because I have to refresh myself on that.
But at least you know the story. So why did we collectively choose this book from 2016 as the first book to talk about in this new podcast?
I believe I found, because we were coming off Joshua Daswell's books, and we were waiting between A and B, and I found this book because we were doing, I think, a road trip or something like that. And I listened to it actually first, and I thought you would like it as well because it lined up with our sci-fi thing.
Explain to the audience. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So I didn't want another book that had commandos. I didn't want another book that was military. I didn't want another book that was some kind of like Firefly scenario. I wanted something more of basically that was a different story, in a sense that didn't have to deal with the pew-pews, but they always end up going pew-pews. But I wanted more of intellectual thinking of a book of sci-fi, like old school. Mm-hmm. And so, because for me, I'm 57 years old, so basically my sci-fi is from the 1960s Star Trek, Twilight Zones, so on and so on and so on. Gene Roddenberry, but also Isaac Asimov, and so on the other ones. So that was my base. So sometimes I'd like to hear that again, but I've heard all these stories before, so I wanted something new and a different take on a different generation.
You were right about the intellectualism of this book. A lot of times, in Star Trek is one of those instances that is a perfect example. They don't explain how things work. They just assume that you're going to it's magic, right? It's magical how things work. They don't really explain how a warp drive works. Warp drive is how we go faster than light.
The story's more important than actually the stage.
So what's different in the Bobiverse is that Dennis E. Taylor actually goes through the science of how this could possibly work in the future. So the basis of the travel is a von Neumann probe. So a von Neumann probe is a theory that a self-replicating ship or probe can explore the universe. So traveling through space is very daunting because it's 3-dimensional. Here on Earth, we only go up, down, we go forward, backward, left, right, north, south. But in space, you could go in any direction. And so a self-replicating probe, a von Neumann probe, would allow the exploration of more areas of space. And so that is the premise of why Bob is self-replicating. So, and then the science is his. So what happens in the story? Spoiler alert. Here's what happens in the story. Bob is living in pretty much modern day, maybe a little bit in the future, not very, maybe a decade in the future, and they have already come up with the way to freeze a human brain or freeze humans so that they can be thawed and placed in a new body in the future.
Right. Well, there are institutions that play with that now, but yeah.
Yes, so that's not it's not a far off. It's something that, I mean, honestly, the way that in vitro fertilization works is the embryos are frozen and they can be frozen for decades.
Well, so even in Futurama, you have the freezing of the heads. That is like basically a base that all sci-fi people kind of like grab onto. It's easy to understand.
Yeah. So Bob's consciousness, his memories, his personality are downloaded into a computer, and he has to come to grips with reality. So he is awoken 100 years in the future, and the world ain't what it used to be. I mean, that basically by the end of the first book, the world has blown itself up. There's only 15 million humans left, and it's up to Bob to save the world.
The thing about sci-fi books in general is that they take whatever the present is and they project it toward the future kind of scenario. And that his base above how humans, end up shooting each other with bombs and whatever it is so current event that it goes to that scary end of things.
There's a quote that I pulled out from the book that touches upon that. People's capacity for turning dogmatic stupidity into political movements never ceased to amaze me. We've knocked off 99.9% of the human race, and somehow the crazy still manage to survive. It justifies the odds. And that really, I mean, there's 15 million humans left on Earth, and they are still trying to blow each other up.
Yeah. It's still a tribal thing of fighting over either resources, mainly as resources, because there's only 15 million, so they're all fighting for it.
Yeah. But they're all still fighting over dogma too.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And that was the thing of basically how when I read Fahrenheit 451, which was he was written, I think, in the 50s, which was basically based in the Cold War scenario. So that was the environment he was writing from. And so it was very relatable. The thing about Fahrenheit 451 is that half the stuff that's in that book actually became to reality. Mm-hmm. Big screens, earbuds, and so on. And that's the same thing with Star Trek. Star Trek is basically the communicators and so on, this, that, and the other thing. Bob is kind of like that in a way, where he takes the current events or what's around us, like an artist, he is an artist, and takes that and projects it forward. Okay, and so he projects the mind and puts it into, say, like you said, data. You're more closely related to data than a cyborg or anything like that. And so this machine saves humanity in a way. But the premise of the book, the first book is should humanity be saved? And I think we're getting off. I think we should probably tell the audience how the book is kind of laid out. He's actually shot off the Earth because all the other factions are doing the same thing, and so everybody starts lobbing missiles at these ships that are flying out into space. With Bob and Asia has one, and Europe has one, and Brazil has one, and they're all competing again, and so they're shooting off. And because he's such the misfit or the oddball kind of scenario, and I think that's the premise of the book, is that basically he is the oddball. He has more freedom. And so he's able to create different things a lot faster because he has more freedom. Because there was a bomb on his ship because they wanted to control him. And he got rid of the bomb, which gave him more freedom to do things. And the only reason why he came back to the Earth was that basically he felt it was his obligation, because he's still somewhat human, although he's a machine, that he wants to see if everything is still alive. in a
Yeah.
sense.
So another quote I pulled was, "How are you supposed to feel if you're forced to do what you would have done anyway?" So the character
Right.
Robert Johansson, he's an engineer who got rich because he sold his software company. So he's very smart, very intelligent, and like you said, Asia, Australia, Brazil, the faith enclave, which is the iteration,
The religious
of
right kind of scenario.
which is the iteration of the United States after Civil War, and
Right.
the religious right takes over. They all create these probes and they send them out into space. Well, Brazil sends out, and again, these are future. This is future countries, not
Right.
not current countries. So Brazil sends out their probe, and they send out a general with a military mind, and that probe only cares about destruction, only cares about winning.
Winning. It was just
Winning.
basically winning. That's
Yeah.
it. It had nothing to do with survival. They'd rather burn the house down if they can't win.
And the it's not actually the Asian conclave, because it's England is part of the Asian conclave because characters have English accents. But that probe gets destroyed, so
Right.
we don't see where it goes. However, the Asian conclave becomes a very important part of the next couple of books. So their probe gets destroyed, but their humanity does not. And then the Australian probe, they picked a sailor, someone who could handle being by himself.
Does that
but he
come in the
wasn't.
first book? Is that the first book or the second book?
Well, let's just talk about the probes.
Okay.
So they I don't know if it's the first or second book, but he's a sailor, but he's not an engineer, and he can't handle being alone. He doesn't know how to do all the coping things that Bob does, and he never replicates, and he goes insane.
Oh,
so
let's make a clarification. Is that before there was Bob, there was a bunch of other ones they tried, and they all went insane
correct.
because they didn't have. Bob created a VR for himself.
Yeah,
because
that's
he's
where
an
I was gonna
engineer.
get
Because
next.
he's an engineer.
Yeah. So because Bob is an engineer, he created a virtual reality for himself, and then when he started replicating, all of his replicants created VRs, and so they were able to function because they needed to hang on to humanity. So they created realistic places worlds for them to reside in. They weren't all the same. Everybody's virtual reality was different. If later on in the stories they can visit each other in each other's VRs. It's very fascinating. But because he's created this VR for himself, he feels more human than the Australian
Well, it grounds
probe did. But another piece of the humanity of Bob is that when he met the Australian, he created virtual reality for him so that he could heal.
Right.
I mean, how are you supposed to feel if you're forced to do what you would have done anyway?
The thing about the whole underlying, you could say like there's a carrier through the whole series or the book is that, and with a good sci-fi you do have this, and even Star Trek, the first the first series, the original series, there was not so much. It was kind of like, oh, this humanity. But actually, if you kind of look at it, it's more of a compassion line. It's a compassion line. Okay. In other words, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of myself so this other person or this other thing can live. And then you have to dealing with basically it's all or nothing situations where basically if I don't do this, all right, everybody's going to die. Okay. And so I could just leave, which a lot of Bobs do. They just leave because they don't want nothing to do with this. And so, but there are so basically he makes, I think we're getting off pat, is that when Bob reproduces himself, all right, that it changes a little bit. So Bob, in other words, the first Bob is like the main blueprint. But when he goes to makes Bob 2 and Bob 3 and Bob 4, each one changes in evolution. Okay, in other words, one gets more of this, one gets more of that. So it's never the same Bob. There's never a cloning scenario. He clones himself, but in that clone, there's variation. It's like twins. You can have identical twins, but they both have different personalities.
Exactly.
All right.
And they kind of look. We have nephews that are identical twins, and they don't look anything like each other.
Right.
But they look like each other, but they don't. But they're identical.
But if you take like a blade of grass, just a simple blade of grass, is that, or a tree? The purpose is it duplicates itself. But in that duplication, there's slight variations of that duplication. They all look the same. It all looks like grass.
Well, environment also plays
Right.
a role in a personality, and each replicant, I don't like the word replicant, and neither does Bob, but I don't know how else to explain it. Each Bob has different life experience. Like the first Bob only had Robert Johansson as a reference point.
Right.
But the second Bob, who calls himself Will Riker, the second Bob, he had Robert Johansson and Bob as a reference.
Right.
And then Riker's first clone, Homer, has Riker, Bob, and Robert Johansson, all those memories. And so the life experience of each clone changes. They're not clones, though. They're computer programs.
Right.
So the life experience of each computer program is just a little bit different than the one before.
So the first book actually sets the premise. Present day Bob gets hit by a car. His brain goes somewhere into a freezer. All right. 100 years down the road, these factions, all this country thing moves. There's basically, it's kind of like a Orwell scenario, Europe and Asia and whatever. And one's religious, one's this, one's that, one's that. So basically the frozen brain goes into the machine. But the thing was, and the first part of the book literally says, Bob asks the doctor who's doing all this, he says, am I the original Bob? Am I Bob? And he goes, no, unfortunately, when we scan your brain, the brain is dead. So in other words, Bob himself, the original Bob, is a copy of the original Bob. So the whole premise, as you kind of work this through, is that even the main character of Bob 1 is not original of Bob 1. So we really never know who Bob really is, except what we know of Bob 1.
Yeah, we never really get to know Robert Johansson.
No.
He's half of a chapter in the first book. The rest is based on Bob and Bob's iterations.
So Bob 1 is actually the closest clone, you could say, to the original Bob. And then from there, it just kind of spreads out like that. But he keeps this whole sci-fi nerdy thing, the nerdy aspect.
Well, personality is personality.
Yeah. I mean, so that's why all the characters are named after Will Riker. He's number 2, so he's number 2, Will Riker. And then you have Homer, and then you have a couple other, and it just keeps on going.
Phineas and Ferb, and Bert and Ernie, and I mean, it just keeps going on. And it's really interesting. Some of the Bobs don't feel comfortable with the whole aspect of cloning themselves. No. And so they're hesitant and they don't want to. And some of them are like, I need help, so I'm going to clone 4.
Right.
And so some of the Bobs create extra Bobs, and some of the extra Bobs are like, I don't want to help you, I'm out of here, and they leave. Right. And some of them are like, oh, this is an interesting thing. I want to help you with this research that you're doing. We didn't mention an important piece. All of this is made possible by 3D printers.
Yes.
So one of the first things that these Bobs do when they reach their destination and wherever they're going is they create a space station with a 3D printer and a communication relay.
Right.
So the 3D printer is what makes everything possible. Yeah, which is, in 2016 when this book was written, 3D printing was new, and now they are building actual communities, houses out of 3D printers.
Yeah.
So this technology is very possible. I mean, I can imagine that within the next 2 decades they can be using 3D printers in space.
Well, that's
even sooner.
That's the difference of good sci-fi, is that the author was able to take what we have now, project it, and then put humanity into it. And because Homer, right? Homer is a character that Will hates, but they're both going to Earth to figure out if they blew themselves up or not. All right, Homer first VR is basically the cartoon Homer because they can create anything they want in their own VRs. And so he talks like Homer, looks like Homer, and this and another thing. But actually, at I believe, I don't want to get into the second book yet, but Homer actually becomes, it's kind of like the R2D2. He actually becomes the heroine in all this. He's actually, you know,
The hero, yeah.
the hero. And so this person that is just irritating, Will can't stand him, and they end up being like, you know, the best of friends and the best. I mean, basically, they rely on each other.
Well, they're like brothers.
Yeah, well, they are brothers, but
Yeah.
the thing is that here's this goofy part of Bob, all right, that everybody kind of just miscut because he's goofy, so you miscount him, right? But he's the one that ends up making the food donuts and creates the food donuts to feed the
Yeah,
people
he's the
on
one who
Earth.
figures out how to keep the humans alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because humans can no longer keep themselves alive.
he is the one actually with the highest compassion.
Yeah.
And from that,
And outside the box thinking.
yeah, and from that, that highest compassion, the Earth people that are left, the vermin, whatever they are, right, that want to destroy everything because humans are
Did you just call them vehement?
vehement. Yeah.
So vehement is this
Faction
faction that
Left on Earth.
wants Earth to just be destroyed and doesn't want the last 15 million humans to even survive.
not Earth to destroy. Want humans destroyed because humans poison the
Oh,
universe.
that's right. Humans poisoned the Earth, and yeah, so that's vehement. I mean,
Right.
this whole thing, there's only 15 million humans left, and there's still people who want
Exactly.
everybody else
They
dead.
will just
It's
want everybody in the oven.
And you know what? I'm a human, but I believe that's true. I believe that there are people who just are so destructive that they only want themselves to be the ones on top, and everybody else they don't care about. All right, so it's time to wrap up. Who do you think would enjoy this book?
I think people would enjoy this book if you're sick of basically, I mean, there are good commando sci-fis, there's good pew-pews, you know, fleets against fleets and all this other stuff. That's easy writing to me. That's really kind of like, you know, you can have some fun with that. But if you're looking for like traditional sci-fi stuff, you know, where basically, you know, it makes you think, makes you want to think.
Speculative fiction.
Yeah, speculative fiction. And that has philosophy in it. That has traditional, I mean, it's basically philosophy has been true and true and true and true. Mm-hmm. He makes some quotes about every time he does every time he starts a chapter, he starts with a Sun Tzu kind of quote, Sun Tzu Art of War kind of thing.
Yeah, some of the quotes that he uses are real quotes, and some of them are quotes that he's made up.
Yeah, but as the series goes down to the fourth and fifth book, he actually grabs main thinker quotes, and he actually puts them in apply because that's where he's going with all that.
Well, the first book was written in 2016, and the most recent book was written in 2024, and a lot happened in that
Right.
8-year time frame.
So as an artist, your environment basically dictates the painting in a way.
yeah.
So that's kind of how that works. But the thing is, if you like the traditional, if you like Asimov that makes you think kind of stuff, if you like that kind of sci-fi, you know, this series is perfect for you. You'll really get into it. You know, if you
And
don't
it's
like
funny.
And it's funny, but if you don't like a lot of detail, because he does go through like it's kind of I mean, how much can Bob's reproduce? I mean, cloning and cloning and cloning and cloning and cloning and cloning. But the thing is that we didn't even touch on the part where basically Bob 1 finds the indigenous people and gets himself involved in that mess.
Well, we don't want to give away too many spoilers.
No, but that gets to
But
the prime directive.
if you have read this book and you would like to join the conversation, please do in the comments. So it's time to wrap up. If you haven't read this book yet and you would like to, you can pick up your copy of We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor on bookshop.org, where every purchase supports indie bookstores, or you can grab the audiobook on Audible. Links to those two links will be in the show notes, and your purchase using our affiliate link does help finance the show because it's not free to host a podcast, but it is free to listen. So if you like speculative fiction and you enjoyed this conversation, please do subscribe. Our next episode, we will be covering the next book in the bobiverse series, For We Are Many, which came out in 2017. So just about 6 months after We Are Legion came out. And I forgot to mention that We Are Legion was the 2016 Best of Science Fiction on Audible. And we'll talk about the narrator of the books in our next episode. So I've been Kandas Rodarte.
I'm Space Cadet Shane.
And you have been listening to Sci-Fi Book Pod.